I'm Daniel, a 38-year-old architect, married to Clara for 12 years. Our life in Portland was a canvas of quiet joys, shared coffee at dawn, her laughter at my terrible puns, our garden blooming under her care. Clara, a freelance illustrator, had a spark that drew people in, her hazel eyes glinting with stories. We weren't perfect, but we were us, or so I thought. The shift was subtle, like a crack in a foundation you don't notice until the house tilts. She started lingering at her studio, her phone buzzing more than usual, her smiles tighter. I chalked it up to deadlines, her passion for art consuming her. But doubt, that insidious weed, took root. One evening, I found her sketchbook open on the kitchen counter. Sketches of a man. Sharp jaw, tousled hair, eyes that weren't mine. Filled pages. The detail was obsessive, intimate, each stroke of her pencil a confession. My chest tightened, but I didn't confront her. Instead, I watched. Her late nights grew frequent, her excuses flimsier. Client meetings, she'd say, her voice a shade too bright. I'd nod, swallowing the bile of suspicion. Then came the dinner party at our neighbors, the Wilsons. Clara wore a dress I hadn't seen before, emerald green, clinging to her like a secret. She laughed too loudly, her hand brushing the arm of Ethan, a local musician with a reputation for charm. Ethan, with his guitar-calloused fingers and knowing smirk, was the man from her sketches. I saw it then, the way her eyes lingered on him, a language I wasn't part of. I started tracking her movements, not proud of it but desperate. Her phone's location showed her at places she hadn't mentioned, cafes, parks, Ethan's loft downtown. I found receipts in her purse for dinners I never ate, wine I didn't drink. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was a performance, a life she was living without me. I felt like a ghost in my own marriage, haunting the edges of her new world. But I didn't confront her yet. I needed proof, something undeniable, to shatter the illusion I'd clung to. I hired a private investigator, a man named Carl with a handshake like iron. "Give me a week," he said. I gave him my trust instead. That night, Clara came home late, her cheeks flushed, her hair slightly mussed. She kissed me absently, her lips tasting of something foreign. Cinnamon, maybe, or deceit. I lay awake, her breathing soft beside me, and planned. Whatever she was doing, whoever she was with, I'd uncover it. And when I did, I'd make her feel the weight of her choices. Revenge wasn't a word I used lightly, but it was a promise I made to myself in the dark. The days after hiring Carl were a blur of routine and dread. I went to work, drafting blueprints for a new library. My hands steady, but my mind fractured. Clara was her usual self, bright, distracted, slipping out for errands that lasted hours. I stopped asking where she was going. Her lies were a blade I didn't need twisted. Carl called 3 days in, his voice gruff over the phone. "Got something. Meet me at the diner on 5th. I left work early, my heart a drumbeat in my chest. The diner smelled of grease and regret. Carl slid a folder across the table, his eyes avoiding mine. Inside were photos. Clara and Ethan at a rooftop bar, her hand on his chest, his lips near her ear. Another showed them entering his loft, her arm looped through his, her smile radiant. There were timestamps, dates, even a grainy shot of them kissing in an alley, her body pressed against a brick wall. My stomach churned, but I kept turning pages. Carl had tracked their meetings, 5 in 3 days, always when I was at work. He'd even pulled Ethan's phone records, showing texts to Clara's number, dozens a day, some late at night. "She's not just stepping out," Carl said, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking sign. "This is a full-on affair, deliberate." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. The folder also held a USB drive. "Video," Carl muttered, "from a security camera near his place. You sure you want to see it?" I wasn't, but I took it anyway. At home, I waited until Clara was at her studio, then plugged the drive into my laptop. The footage was stark. Clara and Ethan, laughing as they stumbled into his building, her hand tugging his shirt. The camera caught her glance back, as if checking for witnesses, before they disappeared inside. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat there, numb, letting the truth carve itself into me. Clara wasn't just betraying me. She was rewriting our life, casting Ethan as the lead. But the numbness gave way to something colder, sharper. I started digging myself, hacking into her email. Her password was still our anniversary date. A cruel irony. There, I found messages to Ethan, gushing about their connection, planning meetups, even a weekend getaway she hadn't mentioned. One email referenced a surprise she was planning for him, something unforgettable. I wondered if she'd ever planned anything for me with that much care. I began to map my response, not just confrontation but something that would make her feel the depth of her betrayal. I'd always been methodical, an architect of structures and solutions. Now I'd design her reckoning. Carl agreed to keep watching, to catch them in a moment so blatant she couldn't deny it. I needed her to face me, to see what she'd broken. And when she did, I'd be ready. The betrayal wasn't just Clara's affair with Ethan. It was the way it unfolded. A performance so bizarre it felt like a fever dream. Carl's next report came with a twist I hadn't expected. He'd followed them to a warehouse on the edge of town, a place used for avant-garde art events. Clara, my Clara, who'd once blushed at public affection, was part of something called The Collective, a group of artists and musicians who staged immersive, boundary-pushing performances. Ethan was the ringleader, and their connection wasn't just romantic. It was a collaboration, a shared obsession played out in front of strangers. Carl's photos showed Clara in a flowing white dress, her face painted with gold, dancing with Ethan in a circle of onlookers. The performance, he learned, was called Union of Souls, a ritualistic display where they mimicked a marriage, vows, rings, even a kiss, while the audience wept and clapped. It wasn't physical intimacy in the traditional sense. It was emotional, spiritual, a public declaration that she belonged to him in ways she'd never belonged to me. The audience thought it was art. I saw it for what it was. A mockery of our vows, a betrayal so public it burned. I attended the next event, slipping into the warehouse with a hoodie and a fake name. The air was thick with incense, the crowd buzzing with pretentious energy. Clara didn't see me, but I saw her, radiant, lost in Ethan's gaze as they recited poetry about transcending bonds. When they kissed, the crowd roared, and I felt my life unravel. This wasn't a fling. It was a reinvention. She was living a fantasy where I didn't exist, where our marriage was a footnote to her art. I left before the finale, my hands shaking, my mind racing. At home, I scoured the internet for The Collective. Their website was a maze of manifestos, praising radical vulnerability and redefining connection. Clara's illustrations were everywhere. Posters, programs, even a mural of her and Ethan entwined, painted on the warehouse wall. She'd poured herself into him, while I was left to water our wilting garden. I found a forum where participants gushed about the raw intimacy of their performances, some hinting at private after-parties where the lines between art and reality blurred. My imagination filled in the gaps, each one a fresh wound. I didn't confront her yet. I needed more, something to shatter her carefully crafted world. Carl suggested bugging her studio, but I hesitated. I wasn't ready to cross that line. Instead, I started attending their events in disguise, documenting every moment. I'd build a case, not just for me but for her to see. Her betrayal wasn't art, it was cruelty. And when I struck back, it would be with the same precision she'd used to erase me. My revenge was taking shape, a structure as cold and deliberate as any I'd ever designed. The more I learned about The Collective, the deeper the betrayal cut. Clara wasn't just performing with Ethan. She was building a life within this group, a cult of self-proclaimed visionaries who saw themselves above mundane commitments like marriage. I kept attending their events, a shadow in the crowd, watching her transform into someone I didn't recognize. Her laughter, once reserved for our quiet moments, now belonged to strangers. Ethan was always there, his hand on her waist, his voice weaving through hers in their bizarre rituals. Each event was a fresh wound, but I endured it, collecting evidence like bricks for a wall I'd soon build around her. Carl's reports grew darker. He'd infiltrated a private afterparty, posing as a caterer. There, Clara and Ethan didn't just perform. They lived their art. They shared a room with other couples, not for physical acts but for soul exchanges, where they bared their deepest desires to each other, tears and all, while others watched. Carl's description made my skin crawl. Clara, sobbing as she told Ethan she'd found her truth with him, while he stroked her hair and called her his muse. It was intimacy weaponized, a betrayal that didn't need physicality to destroy me. She was giving him pieces of herself she'd never offered me, not in 12 years. I started planning my revenge, not with violence or confrontation but with exposure. Clara thrived on her image, her art, her reputation, her carefully curated authenticity. I'd strip that away, make her face the world as I saw her, a liar who'd traded our life for a performance. I began by hacking into the collective's private server, using skills I'd picked up in college. Their security was laughable, a reflection of their arrogance. I found schedules, budgets, even contracts showing Clara was paid for her performances. Money she'd never mentioned. She wasn't just betraying me. She was profiting from it. I also reached out to Ethan's ex, a woman named Lila I found through social media. Over coffee, she spilled everything, Ethan's pattern of luring women into his art, promising transcendence while feeding his ego. He'll discard her when he's bored, Lila warned, her eyes hollow. But she won't see it coming. Lila's story fueled my resolve. I'd make sure Clara saw Ethan's true colors, but not before she faced her own reflection. At home, Clara grew bolder, barely hiding her tracks. She'd leave her phone unlocked, texts from Ethan glowing on the screen. Can't wait for our next ritual. I didn't react, didn't let her see the storm brewing. I was an architect after all, and this was my masterpiece, a revenge that would dismantle her world piece by piece. Carl called with a lead on their next big event, a grand unveiling where Clara and Ethan would transcend. I'd be there, not as a spectator but as the one pulling the strings. The countdown had begun. The grand unveiling was set for a Saturday, a spectacle the collective hyped as their boldest yet. I knew it would be the pinnacle of Clara's betrayal, the moment she and Ethan cemented their union in front of their adoring crowd. I prepared meticulously, my architect's mind turning revenge into a blueprint. Carl had secured me a press pass, posing as a journalist for an obscure art blog. It got me backstage access, where I could see the mechanics of their illusion up close. I also had a USB drive loaded with files from the collective server, emails, budgets, even Clara's gushing messages to Ethan. My plan wasn't to confront her yet. It was to plant seeds that would bloom into her ruin. The warehouse was transformed, draped in velvet and lit by flickering lanterns. The crowd, a mix of hipsters and self-styled intellectuals, buzzed with anticipation. I stayed in the shadows, my press badge a shield. Backstage, I saw Clara, radiant in a silver gown, her eyes locked on Ethan as they rehearsed. Their chemistry was undeniable, a knife in my gut. The performance began with music, a haunting cello that set the mood. Clara and Ethan took the stage, their ritual a blend of dance, poetry, and vows that mimicked a wedding. "We are boundless," Clara declared, her voice trembling with conviction. The crowd wept, but I saw through it, a scripted lie she'd chosen over me. Then came the twist, the non-standard betrayal that broke me. Halfway through, Clara pulled a ring from her finger. My ring, our wedding band, and placed it in a glass bowl. Ethan did the same, adding a ring I didn't recognize. They lit a match, burning the rings as the crowd gasped. We released the past, Ethan intoned, to embrace the eternal now. Clara's smile was serene, as if torching our marriage was her salvation. I stood frozen, my pulse a roar in my ears. This wasn't just infidelity. It was erasure, a public execution of everything we'd built. I slipped backstage during the applause, my hands steady despite the rage. I found their tech booth, unmanned, and plugged in my USB drive. The files uploaded to their projector system, set to play after the finale. I didn't stay to watch. I needed air, needed to breathe before the next step. Outside, I called Carl, who was waiting nearby. "It's done," I said. He didn't ask questions, just promised to keep eyes on Clara and Ethan post-show. My revenge wasn't violence or shouting. It was truth, cold and undeniable. The files would expose their lies. Clara's payments, Ethan's manipulations, their mockery of commitment, projected for all to see. As I drove home, the image of that burning ring seared my mind. Clara thought she transcended me, but I'd make her face the ashes of her choices. The next phase of my plan was ready, a crueler reckoning that would leave her nowhere to hide. The architect in me was just getting started. The morning after the grand unveiling, I woke to chaos I'd orchestrated but didn't witness. My phone buzzed with notifications, texts from mutual friends, voicemails from Clara, even a cryptic email from the collective's PR team. The files I'd uploaded to their projector had played as planned, a silent bomb detonating after Clara and Ethan's performance. Emails exposing Clara's payments for her art, Ethan's manipulative messages to other women, and their shared mockery of mundane bonds, like marriage, flashed across the screen for all to see. The crowd, expecting transcendence, got betrayal instead. Social media was ablaze with posts from attendees, some outraged, others gleeful at the drama. The collective's carefully curated mystique was crumbling. Clara's voicemails were frantic, her voice cracking. "Daniel, we need to talk. It's not what you think." I didn't call back. Let her stew. Let her wonder how I'd known. I sipped my coffee, the architect in me pleased with the first phase. Carl called, reporting the aftermath. Clara and Ethan had fled the warehouse separately, the crowd turning on them with whispers and glares. The collective's leaders were scrambling, issuing apologies for technical errors. But the damage was done. Clara's reputation, her artistic halo, was tarnished. Yet this was only the beginning. I spent the day refining my next move. Revenge wasn't enough. It had to be poetic, a mirror to her betrayal. Clara had burned our marriage in that glass bowl, so I'd burn her world, her art, her community, her identity. I contacted Lila, Ethan's ex, who'd been eager to help. She had dirt on the collective's funding, shady deals with local galleries that propped up their visionary image. I fed this to a journalist friend, Sarah, who wrote for a regional arts magazine. "Expose them," I said, handing her a dossier of Lila's tips and my own findings. Sarah's eyes gleamed. She loved a scandal. At home, Clara's absence was a presence. Her sketchbooks, once treasures, now mocked me from the shelf. I flipped through one, finding more sketches of Ethan, each a stab. I didn't destroy them. They'd serve a purpose later. When Clara finally came home, her eyes were red, her voice small. "Daniel, can we talk?" I looked at her, the woman I'd loved, and saw a stranger. "Not yet," I said, my tone ice. She flinched, retreating to the guest room. Good. Let her feel the walls closing in. My plan's next phase was riskier, targeting Ethan directly. He thought he was untouchable, the charismatic artist above consequence. I'd prove him wrong, using his own ego against him. The architect in me was drafting a trap, one that would make Clara see him for what he was. The game was far from over. Ethan was the key to unraveling Clara's fantasy. He wasn't just her partner in betrayal. He was the architect of her delusion, the one who'd convinced her their art justified torching our life. I needed to expose him, not to the public but to Clara, to shatter the pedestal she'd placed him on. Ethan's weakness was his vanity, his need to be adored. I'd use that, crafting a trap that would make him betray her in turn. My plan was cold, calculated, a structure built to collapse at the right moment. I created a fake persona, Maya, a wealthy art patron with a sleek Instagram profile I built from scratch. Maya's posts dripped with sophistication, gallery openings, cryptic quotes about true visionaries. I followed Ethan's account, liking his posts, commenting just enough to catch his eye. Within days, he followed back, sliding into Maya's DMs with a predictable mix of charm and arrogance. "Your taste is impeccable," he wrote. I smirked, feeding him flattery about his genius. Soon, he was pitching a private performance for Maya, a bespoke ritual at his loft. Perfect. I coordinated with Lila, who knew Ethan's patterns. She suggested planting doubts about Clara in his mind. As Maya, I hinted at funding a solo project for Ethan, but only if he distanced himself from derivative collaborators. I knew he'd see Clara in that jab. She'd always been the stronger artist, her illustrations outshining his music. His replies grew cagey, then eager. "I'm ready to evolve," he wrote, promising a meeting. I set the date, ensuring Clara would be there, tipped off by an anonymous message about Ethan's new muse. Meanwhile, Sarah's article dropped, a scathing exposé on the collective's shady finances. It named Ethan as a key player, skimming funds for personal projects. The arts community turned on him, galleries dropping his work. Clara, already reeling from the projector scandal, was clinging to him, unaware of his wandering eye. I saw it in her face at home, haunted, defensive, still believing Ethan was her savior. She tried talking to me again, her words a jumble of apologies and deflections. "It was art, Daniel, not betrayal." I didn't argue. I just watched her squirm, knowing the next blow was coming. Carl kept tabs on Ethan, confirming he was prepping his loft for Maya's visit, buying wine and candles like a lovesick teenager. I felt a grim satisfaction. Ethan wasn't just cheating on Clara. He was proving she'd been a fool to choose him. The meeting was set for Friday, and I'd make sure Clara saw it all. Ethan's flirtations, his willingness to discard her for a better offer. My revenge was a chess game, and this was check. But the final move, the one that would leave Clara broken, was still in design. I'd lost my wife, but I'd gained something else. The power to rebuild my life on the ruins of hers. Friday arrived, a day heavy with purpose. I'd spent the week fine-tuning the trap, ensuring every piece was in place. As Maya, I'd strung Ethan along, promising a six-figure grant for his solo vision. His messages grew desperate, laced with jabs at Clara's limited scope. I leaked just enough to Clara, an anonymous text with Ethan's address and a time, hinting at a private performance she wasn't invited to. I knew she'd go. Her obsession with him was her blind spot. My role was simple. Stay invisible, let Ethan's betrayal do the work, then deliver the next phase of my revenge. Carl was my eyes, parked outside Ethan's loft with a camera. He texted updates. Clara arrived at 7 p.m., her face pale, slipping into the building. Ethan was already there, the loft glowing with candles, music playing softly. Maya's absence, my absence, didn't matter. Ethan's ego would drive the show. Carl's next text confirmed it. Clara caught Ethan preening for his patron, his words dripping with ambition, dismissing Clara as a phase. She stormed in, their voices rising. Carl caught it on audio. Clara's sobs, Ethan's cold deflection. "You knew this was art, not forever." She left in tears, the illusion shattered. I was at home, waiting. Clara burst in at 9 p.m., her makeup streaked, her hands shaking. "You knew," she spat, seeing my calm. "You set this up." I didn't deny it. "You burned our marriage in front of strangers," I said, my voice steady. "I just held a mirror to your choices." She crumpled, sobbing about art, love, confusion. I didn't comfort her. Instead, I slid a folder across the table, printouts of her emails to Ethan, photos from Carl, even a copy of Sarah's article. "This is who you chose," I said. She didn't touch it, just stared, broken. I could have stopped there, but the architect in me wasn't done. Ethan's betrayal had hurt her, but I needed Clara to feel the full weight of her own actions. I'd been collecting her work, sketchbooks, digital files, even unsent submissions to galleries. She'd poured her soul into the collective, into Ethan, but I'd turned that against her. I contacted a rival art group, one that despised the collective's pretension. Posing as an anonymous donor, I offered them Clara's portfolio, but with a twist. I'd altered her sketches, weaving in subtle insults to the collective, Ethan, and her own rituals. They'd showcase her work as a satire, a public humiliation disguised as art. Clara moved to the guest room, her silence louder than her tears. I didn't gloat, I planned. The rival group's exhibition was in 2 weeks, and Clara would be invited, unaware of the trap. Ethan was already fading, his reputation in tatters, but Clara's reckoning was personal. She'd see her art, her heart, twisted into a mockery. My revenge was a slow burn, and the flames were rising. The rival art group called The Fringe was perfect for my plan. They thrived on subversion, mocking the pompous elite of Portland's art scene. I'd fed them Clara's altered portfolio, claiming it was her secret critique of the collective. The Fringe loved it, seeing her sketches, now laced with caricatures of Ethan and veiled jabs at their soul exchanges, as a bold middle finger to pretension. They planned a gala to unveil her work, inviting Clara as the guest of honor. I ensured she'd attend, sending an anonymous invite praising her visionary shift. She'd walk into her own undoing, believing she was being celebrated. I spent the week tying loose ends. Carl confirmed Ethan was lying low. His gigs canceled, his loft up for sale. The collective was imploding, their funding gone, their members scattering. Clara, meanwhile, was a ghost in our home, barely eating, her eyes hollow. She tried once to explain, mumbling about losing herself in Ethan's world. I listened, expressionless, then walked away. Her pain was real, but so was mine. She'd chosen this path. I was just paving it to its end. The night of the Fringe's gala, I didn't go. I didn't need to. Carl was there, blending into the crowd, ready to record. Clara arrived, hesitant but hopeful, dressed in black like she was mourning her old life. The Fringe's curator gave a speech, praising her courage in exposing the collective's fraud. Clara's smile faltered as the projector lit up, displaying her sketches. The crowd gasped, then laughed. Her art, once intimate, now mocked Ethan's ego, the collective's rituals, even her own role as muse. The alterations were subtle but brutal, turning her love into satire. Clara stood frozen, the room's laughter ablaze. Carl's footage, sent later, showed her fleeing, tears streaming, as the Fringe crowd toasted her genius. Social media exploded, hailing her as a whistleblower, unaware she'd been framed. The irony was perfect. Clara, who'd burned our marriage for art, was now betrayed by it. At home, she didn't return until dawn, her face a mask of defeat. "You did this?" she whispered, finding me in the kitchen. I didn't deny it. "You wanted to transcend," I said. "Now you're free." She sank to the floor, sobbing, but I felt no pity. My revenge was a structure, and this was its cornerstone. The final phase was coming, the cruelest yet. Clara's art was her soul, and I'd turned it against her, but I wasn't done. I'd take the last thing she had left, her belief in herself. I began reaching out to her clients, anonymously, planting doubts about her integrity, her originality. Galleries started pulling her work, citing ethical concerns. Her career, her identity was unraveling. I watched, the architect of her ruin, knowing the final blow would be personal, intimate, and unforgettable. With Clara's reputation in tatters, I turned to the final phase of my revenge, the one that would leave her not just broken but remade in the image of her betrayal. She'd stripped me of my role as her husband, her partner, so I'd strip her of her identity as an artist, a dreamer, a woman with a future. My plan was cruel, yes, but it was proportional. A response to the ring she'd burned, the life she'd erased. I was no longer Daniel, the forgiving husband. I was the architect of her consequences. I started by targeting her network. Using anonymous emails, I contacted her remaining clients, galleries, even her art school mentors, leaking doctored evidence of her plagiarism. I'd taken her sketches, blended them with obscure works from online archives, and presented them as proof she'd stolen ideas. The art world, already skeptical after the Fringe's gala, ate it up. Emails flooded her inbox. Cancellations. "You've changed." She didn't know I was behind it, but she felt the noose tightening. At home, she was a shadow, sketching nothing, staring at walls. I offered no comfort, just silence. Next, I turned to her personal life. Clara had always cherished her small circle of friends, the ones who cheered her artistic awakening with Ethan. I sent them anonymous packages, photos from Carl, excerpts of her emails to Ethan, even a burned copy of our wedding ring, melted into a grotesque lump. The packages included notes. "This is who Clara is." Her friends stopped calling, their group chats went silent. One, her best friend Mara, came by demanding answers. I listened from the hall as Clara sobbed, unable to explain. Mara left and Clara's world grew smaller. The final touch was intimate, a wound only I could inflict. I found her old portfolio, the one from before Ethan, filled with sketches of our life. Our garden, my hands, our quiet moments. I scanned them, altered them to include Ethan's face, his smirk, then printed them as a book titled Transcendence. I left it on her pillow with a note. "Your truth." She found it that night, her scream echoing through the house. I stood outside the guest room, listening as she tore the pages, her sobs raw. She'd see our past, her love for me, twisted into her betrayal, just as she'd twisted our marriage into her art. Clara left the next morning, a suitcase in hand, no destination shared. I didn't stop her. My revenge was complete. Not a shout, not a blow, but a dismantling so thorough she'd carry it forever. The architect in me surveyed the ruins, satisfied. I'd rebuild my life, free of her shadow. But as I stood in our empty house, a flicker of doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? The thought lingered, but I pushed it down. This was justice, my design, and it was done. Clara's departure left the house a hollow shell, each room echoing with memories I couldn't touch. I'd won, hadn't I? My revenge had been meticulous, an architect's masterpiece of ruin. Her career was ashes, her friendships severed, her identity as an artist shattered by the book I'd left on her pillow. Yet, as I walked through our garden, her roses now wilting, I felt no triumph, only a strange weight. Revenge had been my blueprint, but it hadn't rebuilt me. I was still Daniel, the man whose wife had burned their life for a fantasy. I heard whispers about Clara through Portland's art scene. She'd moved to a cheap apartment across town, working as a barista, her sketchbooks untouched. The collective was gone. Ethan vanished to some coastal town, his reputation a wreck. Sarah's articles had spread, painting them as frauds, and my anonymous leaks kept the fire burning. Galleries blacklisted Clara. Even her old professors distanced themselves. I'd made her a pariah, just as she'd made me a ghost in our marriage. But the victory was hollow. At night, I'd stare at her empty side of the bed, wondering if I'd destroyed too much. Carl, ever loyal, checked on her for me. "She's a wreck," he reported, his voice neutral. "Barely leaves her place." I nodded, dismissing him, but his words lingered. Had I wanted this, Clara reduced to nothing, or Clara awakened to her betrayal? The line blurred. I started cleaning the house, packing her things into boxes, not out of kindness but to erase her presence. Her sketchbooks, though, I kept. They were evidence, a reminder of why I'd done this. Flipping through them, I found a sketch of me, pre-Ethan, my eyes soft. Stung, but I didn't tear it. Not yet. I decided to tie up one last loose end. The Fringe, the rival art group. They'd profited from Clara's humiliation, their gala a hit. I sent them an anonymous tip, revealing I'd altered her work. They didn't care, art was art, they said, but the leak spread, tarnishing their credibility. It wasn't about Clara. It was about balance. No one got to thrive on my pain. As winter crept into Portland, I felt the city shift around me, colder, quieter. My revenge was complete, but it hadn't filled the void. I started sketching again, not buildings but abstract shapes, a way to process the chaos. The architect in me was restless, seeking a new design, not of ruin, but of something else. Clara's shadow lingered, but I was ready to step out of it. Or so I thought. 3 months after Clara left, a letter arrived, her handwriting shaky on the envelope. No return address, just my name in ink that bled from rain. I almost burned it, but curiosity won. Inside was a single page, her words raw, unpolished. Daniel, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I need you to know I see it now, what I did, what I broke. I'm trying to rebuild, not as an artist, but as me. I hope you find peace. No apology, no excuses, just a plea for my healing. I read it twice, then set it down, my hands trembling. Peace? She'd torched that years ago. I didn't respond, but her letter cracked something in me. I designed her ruin to mirror her betrayal, but her words suggested she was already broken. Had my revenge been redundant, a hammer on shattered glass? I drove to her apartment, not to see her but to see the truth. From across the street, I watched her through a coffee shop window, her hair dull, her movements slow as she served customers. She wasn't the radiant Clara of the collective, nor the wife I'd loved. She was a stranger, diminished. I drove away, unsure what I'd wanted to find. Back home, I dug into her sketchbooks again, seeking answers. The sketch of me stared back, a relic of a time when we were whole. I started sketching over it, not to erase but to reclaim lines of my own pain, my own story. It wasn't art, it was survival. I realized then that my revenge, while cruel, hadn't freed me. Clara's betrayal had been a performance, but so was my response, a spectacle of control to mask my grief. The architect in me hated the flaw in my design. I'd built her downfall but neglected my own foundation. I reached out to Sarah, not for more leaks but for advice. Over beers, she listened as I confessed the weight of it all. You tore her down, she said. But what's your next project? Her words stuck. I started volunteering at a community center, teaching kids to draw blueprints, finding purpose in their eager questions. It wasn't peace, but it was a start. Clara's letter stayed on my desk, unanswered, a reminder that her ruin wasn't my salvation. I needed to let go, not of her but of the architect who'd weaponized his pain. Then came a call from Carl. She's leaving Portland, he said. Got a job in Seattle, some admin thing. I thanked him, hung up, and felt a strange relief. Clara was moving on, and so could I. My revenge had been a storm, but storms pass. I packed her sketchbooks into a box, ready to donate them, keeping only the sketch of me. It wasn't hers anymore. It was mine, a blueprint for rebuilding. Clara's departure for Seattle should have closed the chapter, but it didn't. Her letter, her diminished figure in that coffee shop, haunted me. I'd crafted a revenge so precise it left no room for her redemption. Yet her words, "I hope you find peace," echoed like a challenge. Was I at peace? The architect in me, always seeking structure, saw a flaw in my design. I'd dismantled her world but hadn't confronted my own role in our unraveling. Not as a victim, but as a man who'd let doubt fester before acting. I decided to face her, not for closure but for truth. I found her new address through Carl, a modest apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill. I drove up on a gray Saturday, the city draped in mist. I didn't call ahead. This wasn't about her comfort. When she opened the door, her eyes widened, then softened. "Daniel," she whispered, stepping aside. Her apartment was sparse. A couch, a table, no art on the walls. The absence of her sketchbooks was louder than any words. We sat, the silence heavy, until I spoke. "Why did you write that letter?" She looked at her hands, scarred from years of charcoal. "Because I saw you in every ruin I made. I didn't just betray you, I betrayed us." Her voice broke, but she continued, describing how Ethan's charisma had felt like freedom, how the collective's rituals had filled a void she couldn't name. "I burned our ring because I thought I was transcending. I was wrong." I listened, not softening but absorbing. Her truth didn't erase her actions, but it humanized them. I told her about my revenge, not the details but the intent. "I wanted you to feel what I felt," I said. "Erased." Her nod was slow, pained. "You succeeded." She didn't beg for forgiveness, didn't justify. Instead, she handed me a small sketch, done on cheap paper, a simple line drawing of two hands not touching but close. "It's not an apology," she said. It's what I have left. I took it not because I forgave her, but because it was honest. We parted without promises, just a shared understanding. We'd both been architects of pain. Driving back, I felt lighter, not healed but unburdened. My revenge had been cruel, yes, but it was also a mirror showing me my own capacity for destruction. I didn't regret it, but I didn't revel in it either. The sketch sat on my passenger seat, a fragile bridge between who we'd been and who we were now. I'd keep it, not as a keepsake but as a reminder. Vengeance builds nothing lasting. My next project, I decided, would be me, my heart, my purpose, my peace. The architect was ready to design again. Back in Portland, I threw myself into rebuilding. The community center became my anchor. The kids' laughter a balm for wounds I hadn't named. Teaching them to draft simple structures, bridges, houses, felt like drafting my own future one line at a time. Their questions, so earnest, forced me to simplify my pain. Clara had hurt me. I'd hurt her back, and now I had to move forward. The architect in me thrived on this clarity, sketching not just buildings but a life free of her shadow. I started socializing again, accepting invites from friends who'd stood by me. Over dinners, I shared parts of the story, not the revenge but the betrayal, the ring burned in a bowl. They listened, some angry for me, others urging me to let go. Sarah, ever blunt, said, "You're more than her betrayal, Daniel. Don't let it define you." Her words stuck, a cornerstone for my new design. I joined a hiking group, the trails a space to breathe, to feel my own strength. The mountains didn't care about my pain, and that indifference was freeing. At home, I redecorated, painting over Clara's favorite colors, replacing her plants with my own. The sketch she'd given me in Seattle hung in my study, not as a shrine but as a marker of truth. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate was a weight I'd carried too long. I heard through Carl that she was settling in Seattle, working a quiet job, maybe sketching again. I wished her no harm, but I didn't wish her well either. She was a chapter closed, her betrayal a lesson etched in stone. My sketches evolved, blending architecture with art, abstract forms that captured resilience, not ruin. I submitted them to a local gallery, not expecting much, but they accepted, scheduling a small show. The irony wasn't lost on me. Clara's art had been her betrayal, and now mine was my rebirth. The show wasn't about her, though. It was about me, Daniel, the man who'd survived. Friends came, their support a scaffolding I hadn't known I needed. Sarah raised a glass, grinning. "To new blueprints," she said. I smiled, feeling the truth of it. As spring bloomed, I felt a shift. The architect in me was no longer obsessed with control, with perfect designs. Life was messy, and I was okay with that. My revenge had been a storm, necessary but fleeting. What mattered now was the foundation I was laying. Friends, purpose, a heart open to possibility. I wasn't healed, not fully, but I was building. And for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of burning rings or broken vows. The architect had found his project, and it was me. A year after Clara left, I stood in my garden, the roses I'd planted thriving where hers had wilted. The architect in me saw symmetry in this destruction giving way to growth, pain to purpose. My life was no longer defined by her betrayal or my revenge, though both had shaped me. The gallery show had been a success, my sketches earning quiet praise, a few sales. It wasn't fame I sought but proof I could create without her shadow. The community center kids were my joy, their blueprints now taped to my fridge, a mosaic of hope. I'd heard Clara was exhibiting again. Small pieces in a Seattle co-op, nothing like her collective days. Carl, still checking in, said she seemed steadier, sketching for herself, not for applause. I didn't resent her recovery. It mirrored my own. Her betrayal, the ring, the rituals Ethan's hold, had been a fire, but fire clears the way for new growth. My revenge, cruel as it was, had been my fire, burning away the man who trusted too blindly. I didn't regret it, but I didn't celebrate it either. It was a tool used and set aside. I started dating cautiously. A woman named Elise, a botanist with a laugh like sunlight, joined me on hikes. We didn't talk about Clara, But I told her I'd been hurt, that I was still learning to trust. She nodded, her hand brushing mine, and I felt possibility, not pressure. The architect in me was sketching a new structure, love, maybe, or just connection, built on honesty, not illusion. Elisa's patience was a gift, her presence a reminder that I wasn't defined by my scars. One evening, I found Clara's letter again, tucked in a drawer. I read it, her plea for my peace no longer a challenge but a marker of how far I'd come. I wrote back, not to send but to release. I'm at peace, I wrote. Not because of you, but despite you. I burned the letter in the garden, the smoke curling skyward, a ritual of my own. No audience, no performance, just me letting go. The sketch she'd given me stayed on my wall, a quiet testament to truth, not pain. As I stood in my gallery's second show, surrounded by friends, Elise at my side, I saw my life as a finished design, not perfect but mine. Clara's betrayal had been a crack in my foundation, my revenge a demolition. But from the rubble, I'd built something stronger, a life of purpose, connection, creation. The architect in me was satisfied, not with ruin but with resilience. I raised a glass to the crowd, to Elise, to myself. To new beginnings, I said, and meant it. The past was gone, the future open, and I was ready to build.